So good day everyone. For today's video, I am going to discuss the history of one of the unforgettable president here in the Philippines, which is Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos. Ferdinand Emmanuel Edralin Marcos Sr., born on September 11, 1917 here in the Philippines, and he died September 28, 1989 in the Honolulu, Hawaii at the age of 72. Notable family members: spouse Imelda Marcos. Marcos attended school in Manila and studied law in the late 1930s at the University of the Philippines near that city. For the assassination in 1933 of a political opponent of his politician father. Marcos was found guilty in November 1939, but he argued his case on appeal to the Philippine Supreme Court and won acquittal a year later. He became a trial lawyer in Manila. During World War II, he was an officer with the Philippines Armed Force. Marcos later claims of having been leader in Filipinos in guerrilla resistance movement were a central factor in his political success, but US government achieves revealed that the actually played little or no part in anti-Japanese activities during 1942 to 1945. From 1946 to 1947, Marcos was a technical assistant of Manuel Rojas, the first president in independent Philippine Republic. He was a member of House of Representatives 1949 to 1959 and up to Senate 1959 to 1965. In serving the Senate President 1963 to 1965. In 1965, Marcos, who was a prominent member of a Liberal Party founded by Rojas, broke with after failing to get his party's nomination for president. He then ran as the Nationalist Party candidate for president against the Liberal President Diosdado Macapagal. The campaign was expensive and bitter. Marcos won and was inaugurated as president on December 30, 1965. In 1969, he was re-elected, becoming the first Philippine president to serve a second term. During his first term, he had made progress in agriculture, industry, and education. Yet, his administration was troubled by increasing student demonstration and violent urban guerrilla activities. September 21, 1972, Marcos imposed martial law on the Philippines, holding that communist and subversive forces had precipitated the crisis. He acted swiftly. Opposition politicians were jailed, and the armed forces became an arm of the regime. Opposed by political leaders, notably Benigno Aquino Jr., was jailed and held in detention for almost 8 years. Marcos was criticized by church leaders and others. In provinces, Maoist communities, New People's Army, and Muslim separatists, notably for Moro National Liberation Front, undertook guerrilla activities intended to bring down the central government. Under martial law, the president assumed extraordinary powers, including the ability to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Marcos announced the end of martial law in January 1981, but he continued to rule in the authoritarian fashion under various constitutional formats. He won election to the newly created position of president against token opposition in June 1981. Marcos' wife from 1954 was Imelda Romualdez Marcos, a former beauty queen. Imelda became a powerful figure after an institution of martial law in 1972. She was often criticized for her appointment of relatives and lucrative governmental and industrial position while she held the post of Government Metropolitan Manila from 1975 to 1986 and Minister of Human Settlements and Ecology from 1979 to 1986. Marcos' later years in power were marred by rampant government corruption, economic stagnation, the steady widening economic inequalities between the poor and the rich, and the steady upgrowth of communist guerrilla insurgency active in the rural areas of the Philippines, innumerable islands. Let's move on to the achievements of President Marcos. It was during his first term that the North Diversion Road, now North Luzon Expressway, initially from Balintawak to Tabang, Giginto, Bulacan, was constructed with the help of AFP Engineering Construction Battalion. Aside from infrastructure development, the following were some of the notable achievements of the first 4 years of Marcos' administration. First, his successful drive against the smuggling. In 1966, more than 100 important smugglers were arrested. In 3 years, from 1966 to 1968, the arrest totaled 5,000. Military men involved in smuggling were forced to retire. Number 2, greater production of rice by promoting the cultivation of IR-8 hybrid rice. In 1968, Philippines became self-sufficient in rice. The first time in history since the American period. In addition, the Philippines exported rice worth US dollar 7 million. Number 3, land reform was given impetus during the first term of President Marcos. 3,739 hectares of land in Central Luzon were distributed to farmers. Number 4, in the field of foreign relations, the Philippines hosts the summit of 7 heads of state: the United States, South Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, and the Philippines, to discuss the worsening problem of Vietnam and to containment of communism in the region. Likewise, President Marcos initiated together with the other 4 heads of state Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore, the formation of the regional organization to combat the communist threat in the region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN. Number 5, government finance were stabilized by higher revenue, collection and loans from treasury bonds, foreign lending, institution and foreign governments. And number 6, peace and order substantially improved in most provinces. However, situation in Manila and some provinces continued to deteriorate deteriorate until the imposition of martial law in 1972. Marcos initially had laudable intentions to improve the economy, to increase agricultural productivity, and to dismantle the oligarchy that had dominated the nation. However, he became corrupted by power and measures set in place to curb student protests, and the challenge from communism became permanent. In the end, he replaced one privileged class with another and gained enormous personal wealth, while his nation's economy, originally strong under his leadership, went into serious decline. His overthrow in 1986 is witness to resilience and determination of people to take control of the political process despite years of oppression. Like Sukarno in Indonesia, Marcos set out safeguard democracy, and in the first decade of his rule, he aggressively did just that. But in the end, he quashed it. Yet, he couldn't totally crush the spirit of Filipino people, who is in the end reclaimed democracy for themselves. In 1983, Marcos' health was beginning to fail, and the opposition to his rule was growing. Hoping to present an alternative to both Marcos and the increasingly powerful new People's Army, Benigno Aquino Jr. returned to Manila on August 21, 1983, only to be shot dead as he stepped off the airplane. The assassination was seen as the work of the government and touch of massive anti-government protests. An independent commission appointed by Marcos concluded in 1984 that high military officers were responsible for Aquino's assassination. To reassert his mandate, Marcos called for presidential elections to be held in 1986, but a formidable political opponent soon emerged in Aquino's widow, Corazon Aquino, who became the presidential candidate of opposition. It was widely asserted that Marcos managed to defeat Aquino and retain the presidency in election of February 7, 1986, only through massive voting fraud on the part of his supporters, deeply discredited at home and abroad in his dubious electoral victory. Marcos held fast to his presidency as the Philippines military split between supporters of his and Aquino's legitimate right to be presidency. A tense standoff that ensued between the two sides ended only when Marcos fled the country on February 25, 1986 at U.S. urging. He went to exile in Hawaii where he remained until his death. The burial of Marcos, who died in 1989 at the libingan ng mga bayani, has been controversial issue as objectors, including victims of human rights violation during the dictator's brutal period of rule and participants of the People Power Revolution, have opposed attempt to bury Marcos, citing the rampant corruption and cronyism of his administrations. Its practice of silencing dissent through arrest, disappearance, and torture by the police and military, and his family in famous kleptocracy, amounting to an estimated 10 billion worth of stolen money that earned Ferdinand and his wife Imelda the Guinness World Record for the greatest step of government. Opinion on his burial were split. 50% of the 1,800 respondents of a survey conducted by SWS in February 2016 said Marcos worthy to be buried at libingan ng mga bayani, while the other half rejected a hero's burial. Before I start doing this video, I asked some of my eldest relatives here in our place on how Marcos led the country as a president. Based on them, Marcos is the president they didn't want to have anymore. They said a lot of people died and they can't do anything about it because they didn't want to involve. They will always follow on what Marcos said, and they said also that Marcos is the longest president here in the Philippines, and the legacy and history will still remain. But now, his son Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos is the new elected president that will lead in our country for 6 years. We are hoping that he would do anything to lift up the Philippines, not to be like his father. We're hoping that he could be a good president that to protect and take care in our country that he is leading. We are trusting him even his father's legacy is unforgettable. Thank you for watching.